The scorching Texas sun beat down on the open highway, heat waves rippling across the pavement. Inside a sleek black Cadillac Escalade, Ethan Caldwell, a self-made millionaire in his late 70s, tapped his fingers restlessly against the leather steering wheel. The air conditioning hummed, fighting a losing battle against the relentless heat. For decades, Ethan had built his empire with precision, always in control, always 3 steps ahead. But today was different. Today, he was stranded miles away from his sprawling Dallas estate, his plans derailed by something as simple as a flat tire. And for the first time in a long time, he had no immediate solution. He had tried calling roadside assistance, but his phone had no signal. With an exasperated sigh, he resigned himself to waiting. Just as frustration started gnawing at him, he noticed movement up the road. A kid, maybe 13 or 14, was walking toward him, wearing a faded baseball cap, a slightly oversized t-shirt, and a pair of worn-out Converse. The boy's stride was steady, his expression sharp and focused. As he neared the vehicle, he stopped, giving Ethan a small nod. "Got yourself a flat, sir?" the boy asked, his voice carrying an easy confidence. "Yeah," Ethan admitted, rubbing his jaw. "Tried calling for help, but no luck out here." The boy offered a small, knowing grin. "I can take care of that." Without another word, he crouched next to the tire, inspecting it with the kind of focus Ethan usually saw in seasoned professionals. "Got a spare?" the kid asked. In the back, Ethan gestured toward the trunk, watching as the boy effortlessly popped it open and pulled out the tools. The kid worked swiftly, methodically, his hands moving with a quiet certainty that felt out of place for someone his age. Ethan, who had built his empire by reading people, found himself unexpectedly intrigued. There was something about the way the boy carried himself, unshaken, deliberate. Minutes passed. The boy finished up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stepped back, admiring his work with quiet satisfaction. "All set," he said, flashing a small but confident smile. Ethan reached into his wallet, pulling out a few crisp bills. He extended them toward the boy. "Here, kid. I really appreciate your help." The boy glanced at the money but took a small step back, lifting his hand in a polite refusal. "No need, sir. Just glad I could help." For the first time in a long while, Ethan was caught off guard. He stood there, money still in hand, watching as the boy turned and started walking away, his faded sneakers kicking up bits of gravel. There was no hesitation, no second glance, just a quiet certainty in his step. Ethan slowly tucked the bills back into his wallet and slid into the driver's seat. As he pulled onto the highway, his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, watching the boy's figure shrink in the distance until he finally disappeared from sight. The rest of the drive home felt different. The city lights of Dallas eventually came into view, but his mind remained stuck on that dusty stretch of road and the kid with the steady hands and unwavering confidence. There was something about him, a quiet dignity, a self-assurance that wasn't built on wealth or power, but something deeper, something rare. That night, Ethan sat in his study, surrounded by shelves of expensive books he never read. The rich scent of aged leather and mahogany filled the air. Across from him, on a polished side table, sat his untouched dinner, a perfectly seared ribeye with roasted asparagus and a glass of Bordeaux he'd usually savor. But tonight, he barely noticed it. He had spent decades dealing with people, business moguls, lawyers, politicians. Every conversation, every handshake, every smile had a purpose. A negotiation, a trade. But that boy, he had done something for nothing. No angle, no expectations. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Caldwell felt something unfamiliar stirring inside him. Ethan leaned back in his chair, the weight of the day settling into his bones. He took a slow sip of his scotch, letting the smoky warmth spread through him. But his mind wasn't in the present. It kept drifting back to the kid, the quiet confidence in his voice, the way he carried himself, the way he turned down the money without a second thought. The boy didn't look like someone who had much. The worn-out sneakers, the sun-faded t-shirt, the dust on his hands, it all told a story. And yet, there was something about him. A kind of dignity, a quiet strength that felt rare these days. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a lingering sense of unfinished business. He wasn't sure if it was guilt, gratitude, or something else entirely, but the feeling was persistent. Before he could overthink it, he grabbed his keys and headed out. The Escalade hummed down the same stretch of road where he had been stranded the day before. He kept scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of the boy. After a couple of hours and a few stops at gas stations and roadside diners, he started asking around. Most people just shrugged or gave vague answers until he stepped into a small cafe off the highway. Behind the counter, an older woman was wiping down a coffee cup when he described the kid. She paused, then nodded knowingly. "Sounds like you're talking about Caleb," she said, tucking her rag into her apron. "That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Willow Creek." "Willow Creek?" Ethan repeated, mentally filing the name away. The woman nodded. "Yep, not much out that way but farmland and dirt roads. Sweet kid, though, raised right." Ethan set a few bills on the counter as a thank you, then turned toward the door. "Appreciate it," he said. As he stepped outside, the Texas sun beat down on him, but all he could think about was a kid named Caleb and why he suddenly felt the need to find him. The town of Willow Creek was about an hour away, tucked between rolling Texas fields and sprawling oak trees. The drive was scenic, endless stretches of golden farmland under a wide-open sky, but Ethan barely noticed. His mind was tangled in questions. Who was this kid, really? What kind of life had shaped him into someone who carried himself with such quiet strength? And why did Ethan, a man who had spent decades keeping people at arm's length, suddenly feel compelled to find him? When he finally reached Willow Creek, the town was as quiet as he'd imagined: modest homes, a few mom-and-pop shops, the kind of place where everyone probably knew everyone. After asking around at a general store, he was eventually pointed toward a small house at the end of a dusty road. The house was humble but well kept, its white paint slightly faded, its front porch sagging just enough to tell a story of years gone by. Ethan pulled up, cut the engine, and sat there for a moment, fingers drumming against the wheel. What exactly was he doing here? What did he even expect to say? With a deep breath, he stepped out and knocked on the door. A few moments later, the door creaked open, revealing a woman in her early 40s. She had tired eyes but a strong presence, the kind of quiet resilience that spoke of long days and hard-earned wisdom. She studied him with polite curiosity. "Can I help you?" she asked. Ethan cleared his throat, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look in his tailored button-down and polished shoes. "Morning, ma'am. Sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday." "Caleb, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression shifted instantly, a soft smile tugging at her lips. "That sounds like my Caleb," she said, shaking her head fondly. "That boy's always helping folks." Ethan nodded, his grip tightening slightly on the hat he hadn't realized he was holding. "I just wanted to thank him properly," he said. "He wouldn't take anything from me yesterday." She seemed unsurprised. With a knowing look, she stepped back and motioned him inside. "He's out back working on the fence. You're welcome to wait." Ethan stepped inside, taking in the space. The furniture was old but well-loved, the air carrying the scent of fresh bread and something faintly sweet, maybe cinnamon. Family photos lined the walls, some slightly crooked, others faded with time. A few drawings, likely from a much younger Caleb, were pinned up beside them. It was a stark contrast to Ethan's own house, a sleek, cold estate filled with expensive art and polished surfaces. Yet there was something undeniably warm about this place, something that felt real. He followed her through the house and out the back door. There, in the yard, Caleb was hard at work, hammering a loose board back into place on the fence. At the sound of footsteps, he looked up, his brow furrowing slightly in surprise when he saw Ethan standing there. "Hey, mister," Caleb said, wiping his hands on his jeans. What are you doing here?" Ethan let out a small chuckle, feeling an odd sense of nervousness he wasn't used to. "Wanted to thank you again," he admitted. "You helped me when I really needed it, and I couldn't stop thinking about it." Caleb shrugged, his expression relaxed, completely unfazed. Wasn't a big deal, but to Ethan, it was. And he wasn't the kind of man to let things go easily. Caleb leaned against the fence, watching him with an easy curiosity. For a moment, neither of them spoke. There was something about the way the kid carried himself steady, unreadable. It made Ethan feel slightly out of place, almost like he was the one being evaluated. "I don't think you realize what a big deal it was," Ethan finally said, breaking the silence. "People don't usually help strangers without expecting something in return." Caleb tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely puzzled by the statement. "I don't see it like that," he replied. "If someone needs help, and I can do it, why wouldn't I?" Ethan stared at him for a moment, caught off guard by the simplicity of it. That wasn't how the world worked, at least, not the world Ethan had spent his life in. He followed Caleb's gaze toward the yard. The fence was patched together with whatever scraps of wood they could find, the grass uneven and dry. Beyond that, an old swing set leaned at an awkward angle, its chains rusted and fraying. It didn't take a sharp mind to see that Caleb's family didn't have much. And yet, here he was, giving without hesitation, expecting nothing in return. "You got a good head on your shoulders," Ethan said, and he meant it. "Your mama must be proud," Caleb grinned, glancing toward the house. "She works hard. I just try to help out where I can." Ethan stood there for a long moment, letting the boy's words sink in. He thought back to his own childhood growing up in a house not so different from this one. His parents had worked themselves to the bone just to keep food on the table, teaching him the value of hard work and perseverance. But somewhere along the way, he had lost sight of those lessons, consumed by the chase for wealth, for success. Standing here now, in the quiet simplicity of Caleb's backyard, something unfamiliar tugged at him, nostalgia, maybe even regret. "I'd like to do something for you and your family," Ethan said at last. Caleb straightened, his expression cautious. "We're okay, mister. We don't need anything." "It ain't about need," Ethan replied firmly. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to return the favor." Before Caleb could say anything, the screen door creaked open, and his mother stepped out onto the porch, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Caleb, you better come inside and wash up before lunch," she called. Then her gaze landed on Ethan, her expression unreadable for a moment before softening. "Would you care to join us? It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome." Ethan hesitated. He wasn't used to invitations like this, genuine, simple, with no expectation attached. But there was something in her voice, in the way she asked, that made it impossible to refuse. "I'd like that," he said, nodding. He followed her inside, stepping into a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and roasted vegetables. The table was small, surrounded by mismatched chairs, but it was set with care. It was a far cry from the extravagant dining rooms he was used to, with their long mahogany tables and silent meals. Yet something about this place felt warmer, more real. Caleb washed his hands at the sink and joined them, his easy smile never fading. As they ate, Ethan found himself unexpectedly drawn into their conversation. Caleb talked about school, about his friends, about how he wanted to be an engineer one day. His mother shared stories about the town, speaking with quiet pride about the people who looked out for one another. The way they talked, the way they truly listened to each other, was something Ethan hadn't experienced in years. For all his wealth and success, his own home felt empty in comparison to this modest kitchen, filled with warmth, laughter, and something far rarer, genuine connection. After lunch, as they cleared the table, Ethan turned to Caleb's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising him," he said, his voice more sincere than he'd intended. "He's got more heart than most people I know." She smiled, her eyes soft with gratitude. "Thank you. He's a good boy," she said, glancing at Caleb, "but we've had our struggles. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Ethan nodded, though his mind was already turning over ideas. He didn't want to overstep, but he couldn't just walk away without doing something. This family had given him a gift he hadn't even realized he needed a reminder of what truly mattered. When he finally left their home that afternoon, something inside him had shifted. The drive back to his estate felt different. He wasn't thinking about business deals or stock portfolios. He was thinking about a patched-up fence, a rusted swing set, and a boy with more dignity than most men he knew. This wasn't about charity. It was about honoring the selflessness Caleb had shown him. It was about giving back, not as a rich man helping the less fortunate, but as one person recognizing the quiet strength of another. And for the first time in a long, long time, Ethan Caldwell knew exactly what he needed to do. The next morning, Ethan got to work. He made calls, dozens of them, old colleagues, contractors, suppliers. By midday, a plan was already in motion. He had built an empire by knowing how to get things done, and this was no different. Except, for the first time in a long time, the project wasn't about profits. Within a week, trucks and workers started arriving at Caleb's home. The quiet, dusty road was suddenly alive with movement, stacks of lumber, fresh paint, and the hum of power tools filling the air. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, directing the renovations like he had 100 projects before. But this one felt different. Caleb and his mother stood nearby, watching in stunned silence. "You didn't have to do this," his mother finally said, her voice thick with emotion as she watched the crew unload supplies. "We've managed just fine on our own." Ethan turned to her, his expression earnest. "You've done more than manage. You've built something real here. But you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. Let me give back." Caleb was unusually quiet, standing beside his mother, watching everything unfold with a thoughtful look in his eyes. Ethan crouched slightly, meeting his gaze. "You taught me something, Caleb. Helping people ain't about money, it's about showing up. I want to show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a transformation. The sagging porch was replaced with sturdy new wood, the leaky roof was patched up, and the old, rusted swing set out back was replaced with a brand new one. Inside, fresh paint brightened the walls, the floors were refinished, and the kitchen was upgraded with modern appliances. At first, Caleb insisted on helping, carrying planks, sweeping debris, doing whatever he could to pitch in, but Ethan wouldn't hear of it. "Your job," he told him with a smile, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Caleb couldn't resist sneaking out to watch the crew work. He hovered near the carpenters, eyes lighting up as he watched them measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, caught on to his curiosity and handed him a measuring tape. "Want to help me mark some cuts?" Joe asked. Before long, Caleb was asking questions about tools, about materials, about the best way to frame a door. His excitement was contagious, and the crew took to him quickly, happy to show him the ropes. Ethan watched from a distance, a quiet pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that mattered, something beyond business deals and financial reports. Watching Caleb work alongside the crew, his energy and curiosity sparking with every new skill he learned, reminded Ethan of himself at that age before life became a blur of boardrooms and bottom lines. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in streaks of gold and violet, the project was nearly complete. Caleb and his mother stood on the new porch, taking it all in. The fresh paint, the repaired roof, the sturdy new railing. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home. Caleb's mother turned to Ethan, her voice thick with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. "It's a home. I don't know how we can ever thank you." Ethan smiled, his tone softer than usual. "You already have," he said. "You reminded me of what life's really about: family, connection, purpose. Truth is, I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of renovations felt more like a celebration than a construction project. Neighbors stopped by to see the transformation, their arms full of homemade gifts, freshly baked bread, jars of home-canned jam, even a potted plant for the front porch. Caleb's laughter rang through the yard as he raced around, showing his friends the new swing set and the freshly painted rooms inside. The house, once weathered and worn, now radiated warmth and life. Ethan stood on the front porch, leaning against the sturdy new railing, watching it all unfold. He hadn't felt joy like this in years, not the fleeting satisfaction of a closed deal or a lucrative investment, but real, unfiltered joy, the kind that came from seeing others thrive. Caleb's mother walked over, a glass of iced tea in her hand. She offered it to Ethan with a warm smile. "You've done more than fix up a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope. And I think, maybe, you found something for yourself too." Ethan nodded, taking a slow sip. The cool sweetness of the tea contrasted with the warmth in his chest. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered: money, status, influence. But none of it ever felt like this. None of it ever filled me the way this has." As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the yard, Caleb bounded up the porch steps, his energy seemingly endless. He hesitated for a moment before speaking, his expression unusually serious. "Mr. Ethan," he began, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us. I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Ethan placed a firm hand on Caleb's shoulder, his voice steady, but full of something deeper, something close to pride. "You already are, Caleb," he said. "Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together in easy silence, watching the sky shift from gold to burnt orange. The heat of the day lingered, but a different kind of warmth settled between them, one built on gratitude, connection, and a shared understanding of what truly mattered. When it was finally time for Ethan to leave, Caleb and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's wide, infectious grin and his mother's tearful smile stayed with him long after he pulled onto the highway. This wasn't the end, he realized. This was just the beginning of something new for all of them. In the weeks that followed, more changes unfolded. Caleb's curiosity about construction grew into something more: a passion, a drive. Ethan made a few calls, arranging for him to shadow the workers who had helped transform the house. Caleb soaked up every bit of knowledge like a sponge, asking questions, learning, growing. And Ethan, he had spent a lifetime building wealth, constructing skyscrapers of success and sealing deals that shaped industries. But for the first time, he felt like he was finally building something that truly mattered. He kept coming back to Willow Creek at first, under the guise of checking on the renovations, making sure Caleb was settling into his apprenticeship. But with every visit, the truth became undeniable. This wasn't just another stop in his journey, it was a return to something real. The town no longer felt like a place he was merely passing through. The quiet streets, the nods of familiar faces, the warmth of a simple meal shared around a worn kitchen table, it was a kind of wealth he had never pursued, but one he now cherished. For the first time in years, Ethan Caldwell wasn't chasing anything. He wasn't looking for the next big deal or the next high-stakes investment. He had already found what mattered. And so, the story ended where it had begun, in a small town with a big heart. A place where one simple act of kindness from a boy had reminded an old man of life's greatest truth. It's not about what you have, it's about what you give.